In the deep, restless heart of the vast Atlantic Ocean, positioned just a mere fleeting whisper away from the sweltering, sun-baked coast of the African continent, lies a jagged archipelago born not of gradual shifting plates, but of violent, subterranean fire. These isolated landmasses are the towering, silent peaks of a hidden volcanic world thrust upward from the crushing depths of the abyssal plain. This is a landscape sculpted over countless millennia, not by the slow, freezing grind of ancient ice, but by rivers of molten rock, boiling magma that once tore through the Earth's crust before being aggressively cooled and hardened by the steady, unrelenting breath of the oceanic trade winds. This is a formidable land of profound, stark, and almost violent visual contrasts. Here, sprawling arid deserts of razor-sharp black lava violently meet pristine, untouched shores of impossible, shimmering gold. These are the Canary Islands. From the silent, omniscient vantage point of a low-orbit satellite, they appear scattered and solitary, resembling precious, fractured jewels resting upon a vast, dark blue cloth of endless water. They are literal fragments of Europe, somehow cast adrift and left to survive in the wild, unpredictable waters of Africa. The quality of the natural light that strikes this isolated Earth is absolute, heavy, and inescapable. It is a brilliant, unfiltered sun that mercilessly sharpens every single colour, casting deep, dramatic shadows and perpetually warming the coarse, porous, volcanic Earth until it radiates heat back into the thin, salty air. But to merely look at the geological surface is to miss the beating heart of this environment. To look closer, past the intimidating basalt formations, is to discover a resilient, deep-rooted culture that is far more than just a passive reflection of the relentless sun. It is a highly complex, intricately woven society that has stubbornly thrived at the turbulent crossroads of entire continents, slowly weaving its turbulent history, its survival mechanisms, and its identity directly into this dramatic, unforgiving landscape. This is a story not of a fleeting, superficial holiday escape for the weary traveller, but of a deep, enduring, and fiercely protected home. It is a continuous life lived perfectly in the precarious balance between two incredibly different worlds. Life in the harsh yet beautiful environment of the Canary Islands is absolutely governed by two omnipotent forces: the blazing sun and the deep, restless sea. The microclimate of this archipelago, often romantically described by outsiders as an eternal spring, is in reality a complex meteorological system that dictates a daily lifestyle lived, for the most part, entirely outdoors, entirely exposed to the elements. The daily rhythm of human existence here begins not with the frantic, artificial rush of the modern metropolis, but with a slow, gentle, and deliberate awakening, deeply attuned to nature. In the small, tightly knit coastal towns and ancient fishing villages that desperately cling to the rocky, battered shorelines, the morning does not start with the blare of alarms. Instead, it begins with the sharp, metallic scent of sea salt hanging thick in the humid air, and the low, rhythmic, thunderous sound of the Atlantic Ocean crashing against the ancient lava flows. The first necessary stop for many of the weathered locals is the small, unassuming local cafe, a physical cornerstone of their isolated community life. Here, sitting on worn wooden chairs beneath the creeping morning shadows, the day truly begins over a cortado. This strong, deeply roasted shot of dark espresso, cut sharply with a minimal splash of fresh, warm milk, is the fuel of the island. Over the clinking of small glass cups and the hiss of the espresso machine, neighbours quietly exchange morning greetings, their voices low and steady. They discuss the day's local news, the subtle shifts in the wind direction, and silently watch the natural world slowly come to life around them. There is a deeply ingrained, unhurried pace to these essential morning rituals. It is a shared, unspoken understanding among the islanders that the day should be eased into with respect, not aggressively conquered. This deliberate slowness is not the casual procrastination often associated with the famous Spanish concept of mañana. Rather, it is a deliberate, highly mindful, and incredibly focused approach to time itself. It is a foundational survival belief that what is truly important for sustaining life will inevitably get done without the destructive, wearing force of unnecessary stress. The beating heart of the local community is almost always the central town plaza, a wide open square meticulously shaded by the massive, twisting branches of ancient laurel trees or towering, sun-bleached palms. It is precisely here, upon the worn, sun-warmed cobblestones, that the true life of the island unfolds in raw public view. It is here that young children, their skin bronzed by the eternal sun, play loudly after the school doors close. Their unfiltered laughter echoes sharply off the massive, imposing stone walls of the central church, a building that has stood as a silent witness for centuries. A few steps away, the deeply wrinkled elders of the village gather daily on iron and wood benches. They sit for hours, their eyes scanning the horizon, their slow, deliberate conversations forming a living, breathing archive of the town's entire history, cataloguing every fierce storm, every bountiful harvest, and every lost sailor. This is also the very space where the community physically comes together for vibrant markets and spiritual festivals. This deeply ingrained culture of shared physical space fosters an incredibly powerful, almost impenetrable sense of belonging. Anonymity in these villages is incredibly rare, almost impossible. People intimately know their neighbours, they know the specific shopkeepers, and they know the exact fishermen who bravely navigate the dark morning waters to bring in the vital daily catch. Life here moves strictly at a human, organic pace, guided by a profound local philosophy that the Spanish call tranquilo. This is not merely relaxation, it is a vital state of psychological calm, a conscious decision of not allowing oneself to be mentally or physically stressed by the rapid, superficial trivialities of the outside modern world. It is a necessary mindset born directly from living on an isolated island where the endless, unmoving horizon is a constant, humbling reminder of one's incredibly small, fragile place in a vast, overwhelming, and dangerously beautiful world. This relaxed, measured pace is perhaps most vibrantly evident in the loud, chaotic, yet perfectly organized local markets, the mercados. These bustling, highly vibrant physical hubs are far more than just commercial places to exchange coins for fresh produce. They are the essential social centres, the actual pumping lifeblood of the community's survival. Here, hardened farmers from the island's steep, unforgiving interior arrive before the sun has fully risen. Their deeply calloused hands, permanently stained and weathered by decades of digging into the sharp, black volcanic soil, carefully arrange their hard-won harvest. They sell rough, soil-covered potatoes, bright, bursting tomatoes, and deeply sweet tropical fruits like thick-skinned bananas and heavy, fragrant papayas. Their makeshift wooden stalls become a sudden, overwhelming riot of intense colour and sharp, earthy aroma against the dark stone of the village. Nearby, the fishermen proudly display the morning's dangerous catch on thick beds of slowly melting ice. You can see the glistening silver-scaled sea bass, the brilliantly coloured almost neon parrotfish, and the massive, muscular dark meat of the Atlantic tuna. Adjacent to them, the local cheesemakers offer small, carefully cut samples of their potent, handcrafted goat cheese. Its incredibly tangy, sharp, and slightly salty flavour is a direct, undeniable physical taste of the arid, wind-swept landscapes where the tough goats graze. The morning air in the Mercado is thickly filled with the constant low murmur of rapid conversation, of friendly but serious bargaining, and of secret, ancient, shared recipes passed down through generations of island women. It is a vital weekly survival ritual that constantly reinforces the unbreakable physical and spiritual connection between the resilient people and the harsh land and violent sea that miraculously provide for them. It is a highly tangible, visible link in a short, hyper-local and incredibly sustainable food chain that keeps this isolated population alive. The deeply layered identity of the Canary Islands is an incredibly rich, complex tapestry, meticulously woven from the disparate threads of fiercely different cultures over the span of many centuries. Long before the heavy wooden hulls of European galleons breached the horizon, these isolated volcanic peaks were inhabited by a resilient, deeply spiritual people. The original inhabitants, known collectively as the Guanches, an indigenous population of distinct North African Berber origin, carved an existence out of the unforgiving basalt and deep, shadowy ravines. Today, they have left behind a mysterious, powerful, and deeply physical legacy that still permeates the archipelago. Their silent presence is keenly felt in the sharply pronounced, indigenous place names that modern islanders still use daily. It is visibly etched into the cryptic, geometric petroglyphs painstakingly carved into remote, wind-scoured rock faces, hidden deep within the island's interior, where few dare to tread. More profoundly, their history is preserved in the remarkably intact, mummified remains resting in the dry, absolute darkness of natural, volcanic caves. These silent bodies speak volumes of a highly sophisticated, deeply organized culture that possessed a profound, almost terrifying reverence for the harsh land that sustained them and the vast, unknowable afterlife that awaited them. The violent arrival of the Spanish conquest in the early 15th century fundamentally altered the trajectory of the archipelago. It brought a heavy wave of transformation, a rigid new language, the imposing stone architecture of a new religion, and a deeply structured societal hierarchy that violently laid the foundation for modern Canarian society. However, the island's precise geographical positioning transformed them into something far more significant than a mere conquered territory. Situated as the crucial, unavoidable stopping point for massive sailing ships desperately navigating the perilous journey between the established ports of Europe, the coast of Africa, and the newly discovered vast expanse of the Americas, the Canary Islands became a chaotic, vibrant melting pot of global influences. For agonizingly long centuries, there was a constant, almost rhythmic flow of desperate human migration between these jagged shores and the distant, fertile lands of Latin America, particularly focusing on the booming economies of Cuba and Venezuela. Countless generations of Canarian islanders, pushed by severe droughts and limited volcanic topsoil, left their ancestral homes in desperate search of survival and basic opportunity across the dark Atlantic. Decades later, many of these weary travelers returned, When their boots finally touched the black sand of their home, they brought with them a sweeping wave of transformation. Strange new vocabularies, complex, syncopated musical rhythms, and deeply robust, exotic agricultural flavors. This continuous historical back and forth across the vast ocean is the precise reason why the modern Canarian dialect spoken today sounds strikingly similar to the soft, rhythmic cadence of Caribbean Spanish. It is also the reason why the foundational rhythms of traditional Canarian folk music possess a distinctly, undeniably Latin American heartbeat. This unique, deeply hybridized cultural heritage is not relegated to dusty museums. It is actively, almost fiercely celebrated with immense, deeply ingrained pride in the island's numerous sprawling local festivals, known as Romerias. These gatherings are emphatically not quiet, solemn religious occasions. Instead, they are massive, overwhelmingly joyous, and visually exploding pilgrimages where entire scattered rural communities physically converge to honor their respective patron saints. Dressed meticulously in heavy, brightly colored traditional Canarian attire, thousands of people commit to walking together for grueling, sun-baked miles along ancient dirt roads. They are closely accompanied by massive, heavily decorated wooden carts, slowly and deliberately pulled by massive, muscular local oxen, their heavy hooves creating a rhythmic, hypnotic thud against the dry earth. Throughout this slow procession, there is a constant, generous sharing of deeply traditional survival foods. Islanders pass around steaming handfuls of papas arrugadas, the iconic wrinkled, salt-crusted potatoes, and massive cuts of heavily roasted, smoke-scented meats with every single stranger they meet along the dusty path. The thick, festive air is continually pierced by the sharp, bright sound of the timpal, a remarkably small, high-pitched, five-stringed instrument resembling a ukulele. This tiny wooden instrument is the absolute, undisputed signature core of all Canarian folk music. The loud, soaring songs and synchronized, stomping dances explicitly tell generational stories of the unpredictable sea, of the hard-won agricultural harvest pulled from the ash, and of an agonizing, enduring love for these isolated rocks. These exhausting, massive celebrations are a living, heavily breathing, physical expression of Canariedad, the unique, powerful Canarian identity. It is a tangible, unbreakable social bond that firmly unites the scattered populations of the entire archipelago against the isolation of the sea. This fierce cultural pride is also starkly reflected in a deeply practical, unbreakable connection to ancient local traditions that were born out of pure geographical necessity. On the incredibly steep, almost vertically terrifying island of La Gomera, the ancient, piercing whistling language known as Silbo Gomero, officially recognized as a UNESCO intangible cultural heritage, is not a forgotten relic. It is actively, mandatorily taught to young children in modern public schools. It is a brilliant, highly functional phonetic language that was carefully developed over centuries to communicate complex, detailed messages directly across the island's immensely deep, aggressively steep-sided ravines, cutting through the howling wind where a human shout would be instantly swallowed. It stands as a monumental testament to the sheer, desperate ingenuity of a determined people forced to physically adapt to an incredibly challenging, fragmented landscape. Deep within the quiet, isolated rural villages, the meticulous, time-consuming traditional crafts are still practiced as daily necessities. The shaping of raw, local clay into heavy pottery, the intricate, physically demanding weaving of dried, palm fronds into durable baskets, and the agonizingly precise drawn thread embroidery known as calado, which requires blinding hours of focused labor under dim light, are fiercely passed down through strict family lineages. Even physical recreation reflects this rugged history. Traditional local sports like lucha canaria, a highly specific, intense form of sandpit wrestling governed by its own unique, ancient rules and a strict, unbreakable code of honorable conduct, are still practiced with incredible, almost violent passion by massive, powerful local athletes. This is emphatically not a superficial, watered-down culture artificially preserved merely for the fleeting amusement of foreign tourists. It is a vital, totally integral, and deeply functional part of daily Canarian life. It is the necessary mechanism for a tough, resilient people to stay physically and spiritually connected to the ancient, buried roots that run exactly as deep as the hardened volcanic rock upon which they stand. The economic engine that relentlessly drives modern Canarian society is undeniably the colossal, ever-turning machinery of global tourism. Every single year, millions of pale visitors, primarily fleeing the freezing, grey, and unforgiving winters of northern Europe, are magnetically drawn to these isolated shores by the guaranteed promise of year-round, blistering sunshine and dramatic, otherworldly landscapes. This massive, sprawling industry is the primary life-sustaining source of vital employment for a significantly large portion of the indigenous population, fundamentally shaping and sometimes severely straining the intricate social and economic fabric of the entire archipelago. Along the heavily developed, sun-baked southern coastlines, massive, sprawling resort towns rise like concrete mirages against the black basalt. These are dense, hyper-active hives of relentless commerce, featuring towering air-conditioned hotels, massive artificial water parks with towering fiberglass slides, and thousands of brightly lit international restaurants offering flavors far removed from the local volcanic soil. Here, in these highly structured, manicured enclaves, the daily rhythm of life is aggressively dictated entirely by the immediate needs and desires of the foreign visitor. The workday, for countless locals, begins brutally early, long before the sun crests the dark ocean horizon. In the quiet chill of the pre-dawn hours, they silently prepare thousands of pristine, white-sheeted hotel rooms, organize massive overflowing buffet breakfasts, or meticulously align endless rows of stark white sun loungers upon the imported golden sand. It is a highly demanding, fast-paced, deeply service-oriented world that operates at a frantic, exhausting velocity, completely detached from the slow, deliberate, tranquilo mindset of the island's interior. Yet, if one travels just a few steep, winding miles away from the glaring neon signs, the smell of coconut sunscreen, and the crowded promenades of the main tourist hubs, a much older, profoundly traditional economy stubbornly endures, rooted deeply in dirt, sweat, and salt. Interestingly, even the monolithic tourism industry itself is slowly fragmenting and diversifying. There is a rapidly growing, deeply significant movement known as turismo rural. This specific sector sees visitors actively turning their backs on the loud, crowded beaches, seeking profound tranquility and an authentic, unfiltered connection to nature. They retreat to the high, silent altitudes, staying in beautifully, painstakingly restored ancient farmhouses and grand, aging manor houses hidden deep within the island's lush, mountainous interior. The air here is sharply different, thick with the scent of damp pine needles, rich soil, and blooming almond trees. This quiet shift has provided a crucial, stabilizing new source of financial income for struggling rural communities, directly helping to fund the incredibly expensive physical preservation of the island's crumbling, centuries-old architectural heritage. Furthermore, in recent years, the islands, particularly the bustling, historic main capital cities of Las Palmas on Gran Canaria and Santa Cruz on Tenerife, have unexpectedly transformed into major global hubs for digital nomads. These are highly mobile remote workers drawn by the magnetic combination of an excellent, stable climate, surprisingly modern urban infrastructure, and, crucially, lightning-fast fiber-optic internet cables running silently beneath 16th-century colonial cobblestones. This new, highly transient, laptop-wielding population is actively depositing yet another complex, cosmopolitan layer onto the island's already deeply hybridized and layered identity. Despite the influx of digital wealth and modern services, the dark, churning Atlantic Ocean permanently remains a vital, irreplaceable source of physical livelihood. In the scattered, tightly knit, fiercely independent small fishing communities that delicately dot the jagged, rocky coastline, the passing of a day is not measured by mechanical clocks, but strictly dictated by the relentless push and pull of the lunar tides. Hardened, weather-beaten fishermen firmly step onto their small, brightly painted wooden boats, the traditional barquillos, long before the first hint of grey dawn bleeds into the sky. They navigate the treacherous, unpredictable offshore currents in absolute, cold darkness, the smell of diesel mixing with the sharp tang of sea salt. They return to the small, wave-battered concrete harbours in the late, blinding morning hours, their hands raw and cracked from handling wet ropes and freezing, heavily salted water. Their hard-won catch, massive, muscular Atlantic tuna, shimmering, silver-scaled sea bass, and deep-red, twisting octopus is forcefully hauled onto the wet docks and sold immediately, directly to waiting local restaurant owners and the loud, bustling public markets. It is an incredibly hard, physically agonizing life, one that strictly requires a deep, almost supernatural, intuitive understanding of the deadly sea's constantly shifting moods. It is a proud, unbroken tradition of survival that is still passed down directly from calloused father to eager son. Simultaneously, moving inland, the island's incredibly unique, highly fractured microclimates managed to support a surprisingly diverse, deeply resilient agricultural sector. On the impossibly steep, violently terraced slopes of the wetter, cloud-covered northern islands, determined farmers meticulously cultivate hardy varieties of ancient potatoes and root vegetables. Their small, fragmented fields create a striking, vibrant patchwork of bright, vivid green standing in stark, dramatic contrast against the dark, nutrient-rich volcanic soil. Further down towards the coast, the famous Canary banana, the Plátano de Canarias, thrives in the heavy, humid air. This specific, localized variety is distinctly smaller, significantly sweeter, and far more densely textured than its massive Latin American counterparts. It serves as a major, highly protected export, carrying a strict, official designation of geographic origin that legally guarantees its unique, sun-drenched volcanic pedigree. Perhaps the most breathtaking agricultural feat, however, is found in the brutal, scorched, completely alien volcanic soils of islands like Lanzarote and La Palma, where a remarkable world-renowned wine industry has miraculously flourished against all geographical logic. Here, in a landscape that closely resembles the barren, lifeless surface of the moon, desperate, ingenious vintners have developed totally unique, back-breaking cultivation methods over centuries to reach the buried, fertile soil trapped beneath the thick, suffocating top layer of black volcanic ash. Farmers must manually dig massive, deep, conical pits directly into the harsh earth. Inside the bottom of each of these deep craters, they carefully plant a single, fragile, bright green grapevine. But the struggle for survival does not end there. To protect these highly vulnerable plants from the constant, howling, moisture-stripping trade winds that relentlessly scour the open plains, each individual pit is painstakingly surrounded by a small, meticulously constructed semicircular wall. These low walls are built entirely by hand, stacking heavy, sharp chunks of raw black lava rock without any mortar. Looking out over these vineyards, the landscape appears as an endless, geometric sea of black craters, each safely holding a tiny, precious drop of green life. This agonizingly slow, highly manual agricultural landscape stands as a monumental, undeniable physical testament to centuries of relentless human effort, sheer desperation, and brilliant environmental ingenuity. It is a vital, beating part of the island's economic survival and its enduring, unyielding identity. The traditional Canarian food placed upon the heavy wooden tables of the islanders is a direct, unpretentious and powerful reflection of the archipelago's turbulent history and its rugged, isolated geography. It is deeply simple, profoundly hearty, and absolutely full of raw, earthy flavor. This cuisine is entirely built upon the incredibly fresh, high-quality ingredients that the harsh, volcanic land and the dark, cold sea reluctantly provide. It is emphatically not a delicate food characterized by elaborate, complex French sauces or overly refined, modern culinary techniques. Rather, it is a rustic cuisine that fiercely celebrates the intense, natural taste of its individual, hard-won components. The undisputed heavy king of the Canarian dining table is, without question, the humble potato. And the most iconic, universally beloved dish is papas arrugadas con mojo. These are specifically small, locally grown potatoes, harvested directly from the dark soil, which are then fiercely boiled in heavily salted water, often seawater in the old days, until their thin skins become deeply wrinkled and encrusted with a fine layer of white salt. They are always served alongside two vividly contrasting sauces, a shockingly vibrant, intensely spicy red mojo meticulously crushed from dried fiery peppers, raw garlic, and oil, and a noticeably milder, highly fragrant green mojo blended smoothly with fresh, bright cilantro or earthy parsley. It is an elemental dish found steaming in absolutely every single home and every local restaurant. It is the literal, physical taste of the islands themselves. Another fundamental, historically crucial pillar of the indigenous Canarian cuisine is gofio. This is a very fine, heavily roasted flour, typically milled from hard grains of corn or ancient wheat. Gofio was the absolute, life-saving staple food of the ancient Guanches, and it has miraculously remained the unshakable cornerstone of the Canarian diet for many perilous centuries. It is the ultimate survival food, a dense, calorie-rich powder that reliably saw isolated islanders through brutal times of devastating drought and economic hardship. Today, it remains incredibly popular and deeply respected. It is vigorously mixed into warm milk for a thick, sustaining breakfast, heavily stirred into simmering, thickened fish soups and thick meat stews to provide dense body, or simply elementally kneaded by hand with fresh water and thick local honey to create a deeply satisfying, energy-rich snack. To eat gofio is to taste the island's difficult history, forming a direct, unbroken physical link to the indigenous, survivalist past. Given their incredibly isolated location entirely surrounded by the vast Atlantic, it is no surprise that fresh, dangerous seafood is a daily, non-negotiable staple of the local diet. Freshly caught, whole grilled fish, very often a large, locally speared sea bass or the brightly coloured parrotfish known locally as vieja, is a common, deeply beloved evening meal. It is typically served with stark, beautiful simplicity, just a sharp, acidic squeeze of fresh, yellow lemon, a heavy side of the omnipresent wrinkled potatoes, and a very crisp, simple, fresh salad. Slow-boiling, heavy stews are also incredibly popular for sustaining the working class, particularly sancocho, a deeply hearty, overwhelmingly savoury dish constructed from heavily salted, dried fish, slowly rehydrated with thick potatoes and sweet potatoes, and potaje de berros, a surprisingly healthy, vibrantly green, and intensely flavourful watercress soup. Tough. Lean goat meat is yet another crucial cornerstone of this mountain cuisine, very often slow-cooked for agonizingly long hours over low, steady flames until the stringy meat becomes incredibly tender, falling apart in rich, dark, heavily spiced, savory stews. The hard, resilient goats also provide the milk for the famous local cheese, queso majorero, originating from the dry, wind-blasted plains of Fuerteventura, a deeply flavorful, firm cheese that is highly renowned and exported throughout all of mainland Spain. For a sweet conclusion to these heavy meals, Canarians most often enjoy the fresh, intensely sweet, locally grown fruit that thrives in the microclimates, perfectly ripe bananas, dripping mangoes, and soft papayas. Alternatively, they indulge in bien mesabe, a shockingly sweet, incredibly rich, thick cream made primarily from crushed local almonds, sugar, and egg yolks, while the massive, sprawling coastal tourist resorts offer an artificial world of bland, international buffet cuisine. The true beating heart of Canarian food culture is strictly found behind the closed doors of the family home. It is found down by the crashing waves in the small, chaotic, family-run seaside fishermen's cooperative restaurants known as cofradías, or deeply hidden away in the steep, mountainous north in the rustic, highly informal, garage-like eateries of Tenerife, known exclusively as guachinches. Here, a loud, shared meal, meticulously prepared with raw ingredients sourced just a few steep kilometers away, is a deeply cherished daily ritual. It is a vital, uninterrupted moment to physically and spiritually connect with extended family and with the very soil and salt of the island itself. To truly live in the Canary Islands is to exist in a state of constant, incredibly intimate and sometimes terrifying physical contact with a massively powerful, deeply dramatic natural world. The towering landscape here is absolutely not a gentle, passive, painted backdrop. It is a highly active, aggressively ever-present geological force that physically dictates and sharply shapes every single minute aspect of daily life. The violent, explosive, volcanic origins of these islands are starkly visible absolutely everywhere one looks. It is seen in the heavy, glittering black sand that aggressively burns the soles of your feet on the beaches, to the colossal, absolutely terrifying caldera of Tidy National Park dominating the center of Tenerife, a massive, high-altitude geological anomaly recognized as a prestigious UNESCO World Heritage Site. To walk here, breathing the dangerously thin, cold air at an altitude of over 3,700 meters is to walk directly through a bizarre geological wonderland. It is a frozen landscape so completely alien, so utterly devoid of familiar life, and so deeply primordial that the international space agencies have literally used its rocky, desolate plains to test the mechanical suspension of Mars rovers before shooting them into space. On the eastern island of Lanzarote, the Timanfaya National Park offers an even more apocalyptic vision, a massive, sprawling, dead sea of violently solidified, razor-sharp lava. It stands as a stark, terrifying and deeply beautiful physical testament to the world-ending, continuous volcanic eruptions that devastated the island in the 18th century, burying entire screaming villages beneath a tidal wave of molten rock. This incredibly unique, demanding environment actively invites and almost aggressively demands an exhausting outdoor life. Hiking, known locally and passionately as senderismo, is not just a hobby, it is a serious national pastime. A massive, incredibly complex network of ancient, dangerous royal paths, the Caminos Reales literally crisscrosses the sheer cliffs of each island. Once serving as the absolute only life-threatening way for locals to travel by foot or mule between utterly remote, isolated mountain villages, today these precarious, narrow dirt trails lead modern hikers through an astonishing, mind-bending variety of entirely distinct ecosystems in an impossibly short vertical distance. A hardened hiker can realistically start their exhausting day sweating in the dead, arid, cactus-strewn, sun-baked landscapes of the deep south. By midday, they can violently climb straight up into the freezing, misty, dripping ancient laurel forests of Garajone National Park on the island of La Gomera, a dark, incredibly dense, living biological relic miraculously surviving from the ancient tertiary period where the thick fog swallows all sound. Finally, by late afternoon, they can end their grueling journey breaking through the cloud layer, standing in the freezing, high-altitude volcanic, rocky deserts of the towering peaks, looking down at a sea of white clouds. These wildly diverse islands are also the exclusive home to deeply bizarre, entirely unique flora, most notably the ancient, incredibly slow-growing and highly iconic dragon tree. This strange, umbrella-shaped prehistoric plant produces a thick, sticky, dark red, blood-like sap that was highly prized and deeply worshipped by ancient indigenous cultures for its supposed magical and medicinal properties. The dark, churning Atlantic Ocean, of course, is the great, terrifying, and beautiful playground that completely encircles this existence. The incredibly consistent howling trade winds and the massive, heavy, world-class oceanic waves that relentlessly batter the exposed coasts of Fuerteventura and Lanzarote make them an absolute undisputed global mecca for professional surfers and extreme windsurfers. The shockingly clear, relatively warm coastal waters are absolutely perfect for deep swimming, snorkeling, and dangerous deep-sea diving down along the sheer, underwater volcanic drop-offs. The incredibly deep, dark, nutrient-rich oceanic channel separating the islands of Tenerife and La Gomera is scientifically recognized as one of the absolute best places in the entire world for observing massive marine mammals. It is the permanent, year-round home to huge, resident populations of massive, dark pilot whales and incredibly agile, intelligent bottlenose dolphins. For many true islanders, a freezing, shocking daily swim in the wild ocean is absolutely not considered a luxury. It is a psychological necessity. It is a deeply ingrained, almost religious daily ritual, a necessary physical shock to wash away the heavy stresses of the modern day and violently reconnect their human bodies with the terrifying, natural, unstoppable rhythm of the sea. This deep, abiding, unspoken appreciation for the wild, totally untamed, and often dangerous beauty that completely surrounds them is a highly fundamental, unbreakable part of the true Canarian character. Occasionally, however, the wild nature delivers a choking reminder of its power, a terrifying, deeply oppressive weather phenomenon known simply as the calima occurs when massive, howling, dust-laden winds blow directly off the scorching Sahara Desert. This massive wall of hot sand completely blankets the islands in a suffocating heat, violently turning the sky a hazy, apocalyptic, glowing orange, drastically reducing visibility to zero, coating every single surface in fine red grit, and painfully reminding absolutely everyone of their incredibly close, precarious proximity to the massive, unforgiving African continent. Life in this incredibly isolated Atlantic paradise is intrinsically bound to a set of profound, highly complex modern challenges. The very same colossal, sprawling industry that physically sustains the economic lifeblood of the islands, global tourism, simultaneously places an immense, almost crushing pressure on its highly fragile, strictly finite natural resources. The aggressive, daily demand for fresh water in a porous, volcanic landscape cursed with incredibly little natural rainfall is a critical life or death issue. This desperate, unending thirst is met almost entirely by massive, energy-intensive desalination plants operating relentlessly along the rocky coastlines. These brutalist, concrete industrial structures hum with a constant, low vibration, violently pulling millions of gallons of heavy, dark seawater, stripping it of its salt through massive filters and pumping it directly into the arid interior to endlessly feed thousands of hotel swimming pools and impossibly lush, artificial green golf courses. Meanwhile, the aggressive, largely unchecked physical development of large-scale tourist infrastructure threatens to irreversibly pave over the highly fragile, utterly unique, and often completely endemic biological ecosystems that make these ancient islands so scientifically precious. The heated, ongoing debate over how to properly manage this overwhelming influx of humanity sustainably, how to desperately find a working, peaceful balance between necessary, life-giving economic growth and desperate, absolute environmental protection, is a constant, vital, and incredibly tense conversation echoing in every single local town hall. Furthermore, the stark physical reality of total geographic isolation from the mainland continents means that the daily cost of living for a typical local family can be punishingly high. Because these are incredibly small, isolated land masses floating alone in a vast ocean, absolutely everything, almost all basic consumer goods, from heavy steel motor vehicles and delicate modern electronics to a vast majority of the daily calories required to feed the millions of people on the islands, must be physically imported over thousands of miles of open water. Massive, rust-streaked cargo ships must slowly navigate the deep, treacherous waters to deliver basic survival necessities, a complex logistical process that drastically inflates the final price tag for the local, working-class consumer. In recent, turbulent years, the aggressively rising, uncontrollable cost of local housing, heavily driven by the explosive, lucrative popularity of short-term tourism rentals and a massive influx of wealthy foreign investment, has made it incredibly difficult, almost entirely impossible, for many working-class young locals to afford a simple stone home in the very coastal villages where their ancestors have lived, worked, and died for centuries. They are slowly, systematically being priced out of their own ancient paradise, forced into smaller, more crowded apartment blocks further away from the lucrative golden coastlines. There is also the profound, heavily invisible, psychological challenge of actively preserving a deeply unique, historically rich cultural identity in the crushing, overwhelming face of modern globalization. Every single year, millions of temporary visitors pass rapidly through the glass doors of the island airports, bringing with them a chaotic wave of foreign languages, foreign habits, and an unrelenting demand for fast, foreign conveniences. The burning, highly complex question remains: how does a small, tightly knit island community successfully maintain its quiet, traditional, deliberate way of life, the slow, highly mindful pace of tranquilo, when the entire fast-paced, highly demanding modern world repeatedly comes knocking directly at your fragile wooden doorstep? These are the incredibly heavy, highly complex existential questions that the resilient Canarian people must consciously navigate and answer every single day. They do so with a characteristic, deeply ingrained blend of practical, survivalist pragmatism, a tough, unyielding islander mentality, and a fierce, deep-seated desire to forcefully protect the highly specific cultural elements, the music, and the ancient language that make their ancestral homes so undeniably unique against the crushing weight of the world. Ultimately, the Canary Islands exist in a remarkably unique, deeply beautiful, and highly precarious state of equilibrium. It is an isolated, dramatic physical space where the extreme, highly civilized southern edge of the European continent violently meets the deep, dark, unknowable vastness of the Atlantic Ocean, with the ancient, sweltering, sand-swept shores of the African continent resting just over the hazy, orange horizon. To live an entire life here, on this black rock, is to engage in a constant, delicate, unending daily negotiation between the heavy weight of the old and the relentless, blinding speed of the new, between the heavy demands of a highly connected, globalized world and the stubborn, enduring, perfectly silent traditions of ancient island culture. It is a rugged, deeply beautiful life directly and physically shaped by the most elemental, terrifying forces of our planet. Deep, boiling subterranean volcanoes, howling oceanic wind, and crushing, cold salt water. Yet, it is entirely defined by a quiet, unbreakable human resilience and a profound, soulful appreciation for the simple, enduring gifts of a tight-knit community and raw, unfiltered nature. Here, in these fortunate, sun-baked isles, a meaningful human life is ultimately measured not by the frantic ticking of a modern mechanical clock, but by the relentless, blinding rising of the fierce sun and the ancient, pulling rhythm of the high oceanic tides. This journey reveals a living, breathing testament to the profound idea that a rich, truly meaningful existence can always be found in the gentle, steady, and incredibly deliberate rhythm of the everyday. Let this profound resilience inspire your own path. Until we meet again on the edge of the world, keep seeking the quiet corners of the earth where humanity